Billy.
Hello.
Hello.
It's good to be with you all again. All five of us are together this week. That's awesome. And we are happy to have those of you who are watching us. You know what? I forgot to tell you all before we started recording, but I looked last week at one of our weeks and we had 100 views.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty excited about that. So, I mean,
that's great.
I don't know if they're viewing the whole thing, but we're averaging about 15 to 20 people every week that are pretty consistent, and that kind of goes up. So thank you all for joining us, those of you who do. This week, we're going to tackle Exodus 24 through 27, kind of a big chunk of chapters again. But there's a lot of repetitiveness and instructions. This is where we start getting into the kind of nitty gritty part of Exodus here. And the bulk of this concerns construction of the tabernacle. It's talking about materials and things to make the tabernacle and all of its furnishings of. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on all of those furnishings and everything. I just want to talk a little bit about the significance of each piece. But before we get to the tabernacle, we got to talk about chapter 24, which is kind of where God confirms the covenant that he has made so far. Now, remember, we've heard the 10 Commandments and we've heard various laws about living in society, kind of societal laws that God has. And so now he calls a group of people to come up now to on the mountain. And this is, of course, they're still encamped around Mount Sinai. And so he says that Moses and Aaron should come up, and then two guys named Nadab and Abihu also, and then 70 elders. And so this is kind of a representation of the camp, because of course you've got thousands of people who are all encamped at the base of the mountain. But only Moses is to come to speak to Yahweh. Um, and but we're told kind of then before they go up in verses 3 and 4 that when the people hear the laws of God, they say that all that the Lord has commanded, we will do. And then we're told something kind of interesting, that Moses writes them all down, which is an interesting basis now here for the assertion that these first 5 books of the Old Testament, particularly the last 4, the first 5 are commonly referred to as the books of Moses, that it was Moses who wrote these things down. And that kind of makes sense, right? When we're talking about, at least from Exodus through Deuteronomy, but that also up until then, what happened in Genesis was kind of oral history. And so Moses writes things down. And we're told that the things that he writes down are the words and the laws. So the words, as a reminder, are the 10 Commandments, the 10 words, and then those laws that we spent time talking about last week. And those are kind of talked about in verse 7 as the book of the covenant. So it's kind of a covenant now that God has not only with his people, but that the people have with each other in living in community together. And then Moses builds an altar and makes a sacrifice. And this sacrifice is for a specific reason. It is for fellowship with God. And this notion of fellowship carries over into the New Testament church, and the early Christian church referred to a lot of times in the New Testament church, this notion of fellowship, or the Greek word is koinonia. Many churches have what they call koinonia groups, kind of borrowing that Greek word, and that simply means this fellowship. It's an altar of earth as was commanded in chapter 20.
That's the definition of it. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, go
Um,
ahead. I didn't hear you.
That quantity word, what does it mean?
Fellowship.
Okay, that's what you were trying to explain. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so this altar then that Moses builds at the base of the mountain is an earthen altar, probably made of stone that's not hewn. And then he also sets up 12 stone pillars, and this is to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So, and then there are sacrifices of bulls and other animals that are made. And this now is a blood sacrifice. It's a blood offering here. And so some of the altar or some of the blood is thrown on the altar, and then some of it is sprinkled on the people. Not all of the people, probably. I mean, we're not told this, but my commentary said that in all likelihood, the blood that is sprinkled on the people to seal the covenant is probably on these 70 elders, since they're the representatives of the people. And that makes sense. Like, how are you going to do this on thousands of people? So it becomes kind of a representative thing. And that is a symbolic gesture here, that that's covenant is sealed with blood. And then I think the other thing that I find really fascinating in chapter 24 is that in verses 9 to 11, we're told that this group of men, these 70 elders, and Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu go up and they saw God. And you get this kind of description here of this, that this lapis lazuli kind of surface is at his feet. And then we're told that God did not hold that against them. So essentially they saw God and survived. And it's a significant moment in their lives. I want to talk a little bit about significance of altars, because the altar is going to be important now as we enter this discussion of the tabernacle, or kind of their place of worship and where God will dwell. An altar is really important. It becomes kind of a focus, and it remains so in the majority of churches today. And an altar is kind of the place where it's the symbolism here of an altar is that it is where God meets man. Sacrifices, of course, were made on it. For those of us who worship in churches that have altars, we also understand that the symbolism of an altar is where God comes to us, particularly on those Sundays when we share in the Lord's Supper, and that takes place. So then God comes to us on that altar. So you can have an altar. This altar, of course, is outside. It's at the base of the mountain. You can have an altar without a sanctuary. There have been many times already in the Old Testament where people have set up altars. That began with Cain and Abel, and Adam and Eve's descendants, where there were altars that were built. And of course, Abraham built altars in most places that he went. He would build an altar, and his sons and grandsons continued that as well. So you can have an altar without a sacred space, a sanctuary, kind of what we talk about here. But you can't have a sanctuary without an altar. So it doesn't go both ways. So if you have a sanctuary there, in order to make it truly, the word sanctuary means holy place. And in order to make it a holy place, we need the symbolism of the altar. We need the symbolism of the place where God comes to meet his people. It's we're visual people, and it's good for us to have that kind of visual symbol. And we'll see that a little bit more as we get further into our discussion about the tabernacle. And then we're told that Moses then goes up into the cloud, and he's there for 40 days and 40 nights. Kind of similar to, you know, this 40 days and 40 nights is a significant thing. Remember when Noah built the ark, how long did it rain?
40
40
days.
days and 40 nights.
Yeah. So this time 40 days, and then Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, and he's there for
40
40
days.
days.
40
yeah.
nights.
All right, so that's
a long time.
frame. I don't know what the number means. It's just, I know it's a symbolic time frame when you see that time. It's 40 days after Easter when Jesus ascends back into heaven. So this time of 40 days is a significant time frame. All right, so any other questions or comments or anything on chapter 24 before we move into the tabernacle?
I just get stuck on that whole blood sprinkling thing.
It's really foreign to us. We
Yeah.
you know, because we
Yeah.
don't live in a sacrificial system, and we don't use blood covenants anymore.
I know, but
Yeah, the closest
Yeah.
thing I can kind of think of when we talk about a blood covenant, you know, blood was the way that a covenant was sealed through like a sacrifice. So of course we saw this with Abraham, right? When he takes the animals and splits them in half, and
yeah,
Gross.
and
Yeah.
God walks down the center.
yeah,
It, you know, our modern day closest comparison we can get to that would be like a notarized signature on a document. You know, when you sign something, especially when it's a notarized signature, that means that it's a binding promise. It's a binding covenant that you're making. And so that's how we do it now. But it used to be when you would make that kind of covenant with people, it would involve blood.
yeah. Okay. Moving on.
Yeah. All right. So chapters 25 through 27 then are the instructions and the pattern that God gives Moses for the tabernacle. And he tells Moses where they're to get the supplies for this tabernacle from, and that's from the people. The people are to make offerings for all of these items that they're going to need to build the tabernacle. And then he lays out the pattern. The tabernacle was the first place that where the Israelite nation had an actual location and place to worship God. And it's movable. It's like a tent. So every time they would move, they would pack the tabernacle up and then set it back up when they would camp in their new spot. Much later then, Jerusalem kind of became the home, the center point, where the center of worship for the nation of Israel. And then so Solomon's son David, or David's son Solomon, builds the first temple. And the first temple is patterned after the tabernacle. So the pattern never changes. And then when that temple was destroyed and other temples were built to replace it, they still always followed this same pattern because it was the pattern that was given by God. It's interesting because when we talk about the tabernacle and temple complex, there's a word that theologians use to talk about this place, and they call it a theoderm. Now, the word theo means God, and the word derm means skin. So this tabernacle, temple, is the God skin. This is the place where God now will come to dwell with his people. His presence will always be there in that place. And in this theoderm, in this God place, everything has significance and everything has symbolism. So we need to know that kind of going in into this as we study all of these things. The altar is like I said, a central component, but it's not the focus. The focus is what we call the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. But in order to enter this sacred complex, there has to be a sacrifice, or there must be a sacrifice of something at the altar. So the altar of sacrifice is at the outside, kind of the entrance, even before you get to the courtyard. And I'll get to that discussion a little bit later when we get to those items. In John chapter 1, John tells us that, he starts off his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then if you jump down to verse 14, he says, and the Word, who of course is Jesus, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. That word dwelt among us, or lived, or made his dwelling among us. That is the word for tabernacle. So now you've got Jesus, who is the God skin in human form, who comes and tabernacles among us as human beings. Okay. So now the temple becomes mobile with Jesus. And I want to spend kind of our discussion this week talking about the symbolism of each place in the tabernacle, particularly how it relates to Jesus. So the first piece that we're told about for them to make is the Ark of the Covenant. And that's in verses 10 through 22 of chapter 25. The Ark of the Covenant will become God's throne and footstool. And the instructions on what to make it of and all of that kind of stuff, I'll let you read on your own. But inside this Ark of the Covenant, Olivia, are you trying to get my attention? Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, you'll know.
Yeah, I know. Well, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye, and I thought it was your little finger. So,
No, I turned the page.
So inside this Ark of the Covenant, then, interestingly, God tells Moses to put the tablets of stone that he will write the words on, which is, of course, the Ten Commandments.
I do have a question now.
Yeah.
Because I guess you didn't really skip. Is it, my commentary doesn't talk about it. Is there a reason the type of wood is so specific to make both the ark and the bench or table or whatever?
Yeah, the acacia wood.
Yeah. Is there a reason?
There's no religious significance to it. I'm guessing that it's because that's a common type of wood, and it would have been easy for them to find.
Oh, in wherever they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kari.
My commentary says much of the tabernacle and its furniture was made of acacia. I say acacia, but I could have it wrong. It was made of acacia wood. Acacia trees flourished in barren regions and were fairly common in Old Testament times. The wood was brownish orange and very hard, making it an excellent material for furniture.
Awesome.
And it's still used in furniture making today.
That's cool to know. Yeah,
Alright.
brownish orange.
yeah, sounds pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, so these stone tablets go inside the Ark of the Covenant. The stone tablets contain on them the law, which is used to accuse humanity. The law accuses us. It tells us where we fail. And that's significant that this goes inside this box. And then the lid that goes on it is called by several different names. Sometimes it's called the atonement cover or the mercy seat. And the lid has these two cherubim on it that are facing each other. And they form then the throne of God. So God would come then, and of course, God doesn't come in human form, right? But so it's believed that then, so the box itself is the footstool, and then the cherubim on the seat form his throne, where he comes to sit. And this Ark of the Covenant then is the thing that is the central point of the tabernacle and the temple. It is going to be housed in the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. It's only accessed or seen, that holy place, that most holy place, on one day a year in the Jewish tradition. And that is on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest would enter that most holy place and sprinkle blood on the mercy seat. For us as Christians, this kind of transfers now to, it becomes important, or is made important on one day, and that is on Good Friday, when Christ takes up his throne on this seat of atonement. So his blood sacrifice then reaches the very throne of God. And that blood sacrifice is the final sacrifice. There's no need after that to make any sacrifices, because that is the one that is the ultimate sacrifice. It's the final sacrifice that is good for all people for all time. And so there's no need now anymore for a Day of Atonement or any sacrifices or anything like that, because that ultimate sacrifice has been made. Paul refers to this mercy seat in Romans 3, verse 25, when he says that Jesus is the propitiation or the atonement, the sacrifice for our sins. And in Hebrews, the author there also talks about that Jesus is three things, actually. He is the high priest who enters, he is the sacrifice, and he is also the mercy seat. So he covers this law then that accuses humanity. So the sacrifice that he makes covers the law then, the accusation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts or comments on the Ark of the Covenant?
Do we know how long it took them to build the ark? Or, yeah,
No, we don't.
okay.
And of course, the Ark of the Covenant was lost before the first temple was destroyed. It was lost during that time. it's believed from some of the things that Jeremiah wrote in both his, the book of Jeremiah that's in Jeremiah and in the Lamentations, that Jeremiah or his assistant hid the Ark of the Covenant, or that God took away the Ark of the Covenant and hid it, because it was not one of the items that was dragged off to Babylon. So it disappeared and has never been seen to this day, until Indiana Jones found it. I'm kidding.
I was gonna ask if you thought that was on purpose.
Pardon me?
I was gonna ask if you thought that it's never been found on purpose,
I
because
think so.
I almost wonder if it doesn't even exist anymore.
Well,
There
there
are
was-
some,
Like God got rid of it, is what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
exactly. There are some who believe that God actually took it back up to heaven, that God removed it from the earth. There are some who believe that it's buried somewhere below the Temple Mount.
where the wood kind of turned into dust or was.
Well,
burned up.
it was all covered with gold, it was all gold plated. So yeah, I don't know, Emma. I don't know.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the actual ark.
I am. Oh, not Noah's Ark, but the Ark of the Covenant. This,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay, so I don't get how it's the seat and the feet, the footstool.
So it
What's the
would
difference?
it would look like a throne. So God, because
Yeah.
it's not very long, right? Or it's not very wide. And these cherubim would kind of come and arch over it.
Yeah.
So God, the seat would be on top of the cherubim's wings.
Oh,
And then his foot would be on the cover of the lid.
Huh.
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
But yet he doesn't take human form. So is it really a footstool?
Yeah. I mean, it's referred to in both ways. It's in throughout the Bible. It's referred to as the throne of God, and it's referred to as the footstool. So
Hmm.
I don't know. It's
Maybe that's not.
yeah, it's purely symbolic, really.
Yeah.
Well, any of the images you pull up don't reflect the description. Not that it matters, but it's just there's a table. Does it sit on the table?
No. Well, no, because it has feet that are made out of gold for it to sit on. And then there are rings on each corner that they put the two long poles through to carry it, because if they touched it, they would die.
Sounds kind of harsh.
So then why does what purpose, starting in verse 23, does that description,
You gotta look here.
why does that matter?
Oh, well, the table is second. So the table is a separate piece of furniture.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So the table then, so the only thing inside the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. That's it.
Oh.
Yeah, and so now, so we're starting kind of at the center of the tabernacle. And now we move out into the next kind of area. And that is called the holy place. So we've got the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. And now we're moving out to the holy place. And in the holy place now is this table. And the
Kind of like a building, so like the office is where the ark. I'm just trying to make sense in my head. It doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer.
It's a 2-room tent.
kind of,
I was like, that still doesn't make sense to me.
You open
I
the curtain at the first part is the holy part, and then you gotta walk through the special door in the back to go into the most holy of holies where the ark is.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
except
That's my picture
yeah.
in my head.
yeah.
It makes me think of a building with like the office inside where the ark would be, or conference room, whatever you want to say, and then like the lobby.
Very good. Yeah, that works too.
Yeah, kind of. If you have a Bible that will give you a visual, like a drawing of the tabernacle, that's really helpful. I made one, and
Oh, you did? Okay.
I don't know if you can see this. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, kinda.
yeah, so let me see.
Oh,
This
so Kari
place-
makes more sense. Okay.
So the whole tabernacle is this big square. All right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then within that bigger square is this smaller square that is sectioned off with the veil
Into two parts.
into two parts. This part is the Holy of Holies, and this
Okay.
part is the holy place.
Okay. Sorry to derail everyone.
Oh, that's fine.
No, it's
I
good.
had
It doesn't make sense to me when I read it because I can't visualize it correctly.
Right.
to actually go to my different Bible that actually had the drawing because I needed to visualize it. So
Okay.
if you have a Bible or look on the internet, you know, the
Okay.
drawing of the tabernacle, that helps make a whole lot of sense.
I kind of have a picture of it on my Bible.
Yeah, a lot of Bibles have a picture.
I'm trying to see it.
It's
Oh.
you're blurred.
Still
So
blurred. I
no,
don't know how to get rid of that blur.
You've blurred your background, Emma, so that's why your picture is blurred, I think.
How do I get rid of the?
Yeah.
Well, that's all right.
yeah,
We're gonna be here till 10 if we
right. Yeah, we need to move here.
I'll
So
be asleep.
I
table
turned into a
down,
pumpkin at 8:30.
this Holy
My
of
outfit
Holies.
turned into a beautiful ball gown.
The Holy of Holy Places is separated by the veil. And the veil, where are my notes on the veil?
Like, are we in chapter 26?
We're still in chapter 25. Verses 23 to 30 is the construction of the table. And the
Mhm.
table is to hold all of the elements that they use, like the plates and the goblets and stuff. But there's also a plate there that has something called the bread of the presence, which in Hebrew actually translates to bread of the face. So this is 12 loaves of bread that are set out, and they're there every day. They are eaten, all 12 loaves are eaten by the priests on the Sabbath, every Sabbath. And then they put out 12 more loaves of bread. And there they sit, that table sits kind of in front of the veil and off to the side a little bit. And so because it's so close to the presence of God, then the bread is considered holy. And so that's why it's only eaten by the priests.
Okay.
Yeah. So of course, when we look at the symbolism now connected to Jesus, when we have this table in our holy place, the bread, which is his body, is the thing that sits on the table. But Peter calls us a priesthood of all believers. So we all become priests with our great high priest, and we all eat that bread of the presence of God every time we share the Lord's Supper.
Mhm.
So the next item then, and now we're still at the end of chapter 25, verses 31 to 40, is the lampstand. This is the menorah. And so the menorah is a very important symbol for the nation of Israel. And if you don't read anything else, read the description of how this menorah is to be made, because it's really beautiful. And if you've seen a menorah, you can kind of see how it's done. But the menorah is symbolic of many, many things here. It is symbolic of light, of course, which is the first thing that God creates. It's also shaped somewhat like a tree. So we think about the symbolism there for the tree of life that we see in Eden, and that we also see in Revelation, at the end of Revelation, when we see the tree of life standing in the center. The menorah also for us as Christians is significant of the cross. This is, for us, the cross becomes the tree of life. That's, Jesus was crucified on the tree, and for us that brings life. Again, in Revelation, John sees this vision of in the first chapter of this lampstand or menorah that appears, and he is told that this lampstand represents Israel and the church. And then finally in chapter 4 of Revelation, John talks about seeing the vision of this menorah, these 7 lights that represent the 7-fold Spirit of God. So this menorah is just rich with symbolism here, and that stands then also in this holy place. And then the only other thing then that is in that place is the veil. And that's described when it talks about how to make the curtains for the tabernacle. So in chapter 26 is how they make the curtains for the tabernacle. And you might kind of miss it, but it's in, I didn't write down the verses. Starting at verse 31, the curtain for the holy, to separate the most holy place.
What
I'm
verses are you in?
Pardon me?
What verses are you in?
I'm in chapter 26 and starting at verse 31, where it talks about the veil that separates the most holy place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The rest of chapter 26 kind of talks about all the curtains that are made to construct the tabernacle. And the thing that I just noticed, and this is my own thing, I didn't find anything in it in my commentaries, but I noticed that in the instructions, you make 10 curtains for the sides, and then 11 curtains for kind of like the top.
Mhm.
So I added those both together, which equals 21. And 7 times 3 equals 21. That was just my, I thought that was just kind of cool. I mean, is it a number thing? Is it significant? Is that 21 thing significant? I don't know. So this veil that's constructed is the one that separates God from humanity all the time, except for once a year. When the high priest would go in on the Day of Atonement and offer the sacrifice for the sins of the people. We are told in Matthew, Mark, and in Luke, in their crucifixion accounts, when Jesus dies, the veil is torn in two from the top to the bottom. And that's hugely significant, because what that means then is now there is no more separation between God and the people, that God is accessible all the time, and essentially that God's moved out of this most holy place. So the veil then becomes for us the flesh of Jesus, and that moves among us. All right.
I think it's worth pointing out. I mean, my Bible says make a curtain. You're using the term veil. I think we need to understand just what this piece of cloth is made out of. It's not a veil. It's not something thin.
Right.
It's very, very heavy. It's very, tightly woven together. And so when you think about that thing splitting, I mean, the significance of that just gives me chills.
I
It
know.
just, I mean, it's somebody didn't just go up and go, I mean, God himself ripped that sucker apart. There's
Yeah,
no other
because
way
it's
to
poured from
explain
the
it.
top to the bottom.
Yeah, all the way
And
through.
it's super high. I can't remember how tall it is, but once it
Mhm.
even like built in, when we get to the instructions, later when you get into the instructions for when Solomon builds the temple, that curtain becomes even taller. So it's massive, and you're right, it's heavy, it's tightly woven, and it doesn't just rip when you blow on it. It's
No, it's just the significance of that, just
yeah,
like I said, gives me chills. It's
yeah.
just
It's huge. And
awesome.
when you see that mentioned in all three gospels, all three synoptic gospels, then you know it's important. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. So then we move to chapter 27, which talks about this altar of Olivia, go ahead.
Did you are you gonna not talk about the significance of the placement of the furniture? Did your commentary talk about that? Where the bread goes,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
the stand goes, and where or the table, whatever.
Yeah. So in the holy place,
Talk
right
about
in,
it a little bit.
yeah, right in front of the veil or the curtain that separates the most holy place is actually not included in this part, but there's an altar of incense where incense is burned. That's right in front of it. So as you stand facing the Holy of Holies, then the table with the bread is on the right, and the menorah or lampstand is on the left.
Mine mentions like the north side, the south side, and then what that means.
Oh, go ahead and share it.
My commentary talks about it calls it three great obligations. Prayer, which is the altar of incense, fellowship, the table of showbread, and then to receive illumination, which is the lampstand.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
But
cool.
one is placed on the north, one's on the south, one's
So
on
the table of showbread is on the north side of the tabernacle.
Mhm.
The lampstand is toward the south, and then the it doesn't say where the altar of incense is, but it's in the middle. Cause like the verse where it is. My Bible says the north side and then the south side.
Okay. So
yeah,
it's
mine does too.
understood, it's understood that the Ark of the Covenant is to the east. When you face east, you're facing the Ark of the Covenant.
I was just wondering that.
Yeah.
So then the journey of the walk with God is what it talks about. You encounter the altar of incense first, coming from the south, as I understand it, and then you encounter the table of showbread, and I guess the lampstand is more like southeast or whatever to light your
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
to
pretty cool.
to the altar or to the
Yeah.
tabernacle or whatever, Ark
Yeah.
of Covenant. So I didn't know if your commentary mentioned that.
It did not. I think the thing that's interesting though is this notion of it being, that the holy place is when you face east, you are facing the holy place, the most holy place. And so when we bury people in cemeteries, Christian cemeteries bury people so that on the day of the resurrection, when we are bodily raised from the dead, people will raise from their graves and be standing and facing east. And that's the direction that Christ will come to get us. So all graves are laid out in that way, so that their feet are at the east end. Yeah.
I'm gonna face you towards the west just to mess with you.
No, you can't. It's against the All right. This altar of burnt offering that's talked about in chapter 27 then is an altar that is built outside of this holy place.
Mhm.
And that is required you have to make a sacrifice to even enter into the courtyard, because the courtyard is talked about also. So there's a courtyard that you come into. When you come into the tabernacle, there's a courtyard, but then there's this altar of sacrifice. So you have to make a sacrifice before you can go in any further. So those two things are talked about in chapter 27, the courtyard and the altar of burnt offering. And then the last thing, well, I want to back up a little bit. When I talk about a sacrifice that's required to enter into the presence to be able to worship God, the one of the Psalms, I think it might be 53 or 51, but I'm not entirely certain because I forgot to look it up. When it's talking about God desires, sacrifices, and what sacrifice does God desire? The sacrifice that is desired by God is a broken and contrite heart. So it's a heart that is broken by its knowledge of sin, and you're contrite about that. You're repentant about your sin. So that's the sacrifice that God desires for us to come into his presence to worship. And then finally, the chapter ends with this necessity here to have pure olive oil for the lampstand, so that they can be kept burning. And this will become Aaron's job. Aaron and the priests is to make sure that the candles are always, or the lamps are always filled with oil and the wicks are trimmed so that they can burn from evening into morning. And it's interesting because it says this is to be a lasting ordinance among the Israelites for the generations to come. So all of these instructions are very carefully ordered. All of these pieces that are involved are meticulous, and their purpose is to honor God and to recognize his holiness. And it's set up that way. We talked, was it last week or the week before, about how the Levites are the only ones that can be in that place, the closest place to the tabernacle. And then the rest of the people have to be out far. So it's like there are these kind of steps that you have to go to get close, to be in the presence of God. Of course, Jesus becomes all of that and takes all of that away. And that's why the tearing of the curtain or the veil in the temple is so significant, because what Jesus does is he satisfies all of these things and makes it possible for all of us to enter into the presence of God at any time. My personal opinion is that doesn't mean that we treat that just because we have that honor now and that privilege of being able to enter the presence of God at any time, because Jesus has opened that way for us, that doesn't mean that we treat that casually or without reverence and without awe and without the respect and honor that is due to the Almighty. And I think that's why worship is the way it is. We carefully order our worship services just to create that kind of environment so that we remember that the God that we worship is worthy of awe. All
Amen.
right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I have a little tidbit. The when it talks about oil for the lampstand, I don't know how else to word this because I'm blanking on what it's called, but it's like the Jewish origin story of how they are gonna run out of oil.
Hanukkah.
Did yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't hate on me, y'all.
No.
Blanked on the word Hanukkah. But that's in their like origin story of how of why they light the menorah for 7 days.
Exactly, because this was commanded by God that the lampstand should be kept burning all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But in the, I want to say maybe 4th or 6th century BC, when Israel was occupied and the temple had been desecrated, but the Maccabeans revolted and seized back the temple and had to purify the temple because it had been desecrated. But they found that there was not enough oil to burn for the 7 days required for the cleansing, purification of the temple. There was only enough oil, I think, for 1 day. And the miracle of Hanukkah, this is where the holiday of Hanukkah comes, is that the oil lasted miraculously for 7 days, enough to purify the temple so that it could be used again to worship Yahweh. And so that is, you're right, that's why the Jewish people during the season of Hanukkah light the menorah. They light 1 candle a night until the last night of Hanukkah, then all 7 candles are lit. The national symbol of Israel is the menorah. And you will see it all over.
I didn't know that.
Yep. The menorah and the olive tree. And if you look at a menorah, it's shaped really similar to like an olive tree. So if you ever have the chance to watch the grand final night Hanukkah celebration in Jerusalem, they have a gigantic menorah. It's a really moving ceremony, and it's a beautiful thing to see that giant menorah lit.
Did you see it when you were there?
No, they only take it out during Hanukkah, so we were there at the end of January. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. Let's pray. Gracious God, sometimes we get too caught up in the minutia of our worship space and our rituals and our practices. So we thank you for reminders like this that help us to remember that each part of our worship has a purpose and that it is all ordered and planned out by you. And that is to bring glory and honor to you and to remember us, to have awe for your holy presence. We thank you that curtain has been opened through the work of Jesus on the cross, and that we have access to you at all times. But we ask that you help us to remember that when we approach you, that we do so with reverence and awe and respect. Be with us as we go our separate ways this week. Help us to share your gospel with all of those who need to hear it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. It was good to have you with us to slog through this, and we will look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye.